Islamic master-slave dialectic. Got this idea once studying Hegel's master-slave dialectic. The idea, of course, of a master-slave dialectic predates the German philosopher by more than 1,000 years. You could argue that the religion of Islam is built partly on this notion of the master-slave relationship. If you think about names like Allah, in fact, the father of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is Abdullah. It means the slave of Allah. That means the idea of Allah, the deity, exists in a society before the Prophet. And for our purposes, the notion of a slave and a master is present before the coming of Islam. There's, of course, no doubt about this or dispute about this. In fact, what the Prophet of Islam does or proposes to do is to perfect the existing forms of religiosities in the Arab lands at the time. This would include forms of Judaism, Christianity, Sabianism, and the religions of the pagans, the Jahiliyyah. It is the notion of the master-slave that is strongly utilized to develop the new society. Allah, the God, becomes the master and is ascribed a variety of titles. Some of the more common ones would include the most merciful, Ar-Rahman, the most compassionate, Ar-Rahim, the protector, Al-Muhaymin, the supreme, Al-Mutakabbir, the subduer, Al-Qahar, and in total 99 of them. These attributes are used to instill in the warriors at the time a sense of becoming the most powerful people in the region by focusing on becoming like the master, the strongest, the most powerful, the most forgiving, with the caveat that they know they can never be as good as the master. And they do become successful. They become kings. They become Al-Malik, Al-Qudus, the most holy, Al-Muhaymin, Al-Aziz, the Almighty, while constantly reminding themselves that they are subject to a higher power whose attributes they will never be able to match. Now, imagine an invading force that is powerful, very powerful, wise, amongst them the most wise, strong, yet very compassionate and merciful. I would imagine it would be somewhat attractive. And not long after that, they became the biggest religion in that part of the world. So the question then is, how does this model of the master-slave differ from Hegel coming up with his master-slave model 1,200 years after this? Well, look at the first, let's say, self-consciousness and recognition. For Hegel, self-consciousness emerges through a process of recognition. An individual becomes aware of themselves by being acknowledged by another. In Islam, self-consciousness emerges through a process of recognition. An individual becomes aware of themselves in relation to God as the giver of consciousness. For Hegel, there's a necessity of two self-conscious beings encountering each other, and each seeks to have their sense of self recognized by the other. However, for Hegel, this leads to conflict, as recognition in this case requires the other to acknowledge their independence. For Islam, the individual encounters God and respects the higher consciousness of God as the supplier of the individual's attributes. There is no conflict as no mutual dependence exists. The individual depends on God, but God does not depend or need the recognition of the human. So this is a major difference between Hegel's master-slave dialectic and the Islamic notion of the master-slave dialectic. For Hegel, the strong struggle for recognition, when two self-conscious beings meet, for him a struggle ensures because both want to be recognized as independent beings. This struggle can lead to a life or death confrontation. One of the participants, fearing death, would then submit and becomes the slave, while the other assumes the position of the master. In Islam, there is no mutual struggle to be recognized, as the position of the master is ontologically and epistemologically certain. So there's a major difference. The human takes on, in the Hegel case, the master is godlike. For Hegel, this master-slave relationship, the master gains dominance over the slave. The master commands the slave and enjoys the products of the slave's labor. The slave, on the other hand, is forced to work and serve the master. In Islam, the slave is free to choose, and the master is not dependent on the slave's labor. Major difference in that regard. The slave is not forced to work for the master. The slave works for the master through devotion and love. A master is the most merciful and the most forgiving. There are no beings more merciful or forgiving in the consciousness of the slave. For Hegel, the slave's path to freedom is through labor. The slave gains a sense of mastery over the material world and begins to develop the self-consciousness through this. The slave's experience of working on the world gives them an opportunity for intellectual and spiritual growth, leading to the possibility of achieving true freedom and, in effect, self-consciousness. For Islam, the material world is necessary but